Our goal for today is to analyze sources through the lens of a question. This is also known as a document-based question. The guiding or document-based question that we've been using for this unit is, how did social structures affect people's lives in ancient Kush? We started exploring this question by thinking about some of the ways that social structures like gender, class, and race affect our lives today. And we took this knowledge and applied it to some documents that we've been looking at in ancient Kush. So to start off, we need to think about, as we're sourcing, so thinking about where these sources come from and what information we have about where they were made, at what time period they were made. We need to remind ourselves of the difference between primary and secondary sources. So let's take a moment and look at this. A primary source is a first-hand account created by someone who lived at that time in history. So today, some of the sources you'll be analyzing are primary sources. Some are secondary. A secondary source is a second-hand account, most likely something coming from a textbook or an analysis of a historical event that was written today. So this is an example of a primary source we were looking at from ancient Kush. And on Monday, I asked you to write about what this image can tell us about the civilization of ancient Kush. We analyzed this starting with the subtopic of gender, but today we're going to go back and think about if there are other social structures that we might be able to analyze some of these images through. For example, so here's an image we looked at on Monday. So with regard to gender, if I were analyzing this image, first I would mark up, and we talked about how this is an image of Queen Hatshepsut in ancient Egypt, but we see that the image has been destroyed. So if I were marking this up with the chart that we're using today, I would note some of the details that I'm seeing, key observations, key sourcing, so where this image comes from, what is the historical source. This is a primary source. And then I would make some inferences or analyze what is going on here. What does this source tell me about gender and how gender was playing out in ancient Egypt? So I'm going to show you an example using some of our sources from Mesopotamia. This is the chart that you'll be using today. So here's our learning target. On this chart, I've chosen two visual sources for you to analyze. These are sources 1 and 2, posted on Schoology. And then you have a choice on the back of this chart. So I would like you to choose one of the text sources, either source 3 or source 4. Those are pasted into your notebook and also available on Schoology. And then there are 4 additional sources that you can choose from, and I've given you space to write in 2 sources of your choosing. So if we're going back to the standard of Ur, here's our image from Mesopotamia. We've spent a lot of time analyzing this image, and I just want to show you how I would fill in the chart for this image. The difference between what we've done in the past is that now we're gathering evidence that could specifically help us with answering our question about how social structures affected people's lives. So first of all, I'm going to look for some sourcing information. I've posted this information for you on Schoology for many of the sources, and you don't need to answer all of these questions, but think about, is this a primary source or is this secondary? What information do you have about when it was created or written, why it was created, maybe perhaps where or by whom it was created, if you have that information. So the standard of Ur, this is a primary source. I have the information that it was made out of wood and pieces of shell. It was found in the city of Ur in Iraq, and it's from the year 2600 BCE, so I'm filling in this information on my chart. Next, I'm going to look for some evidence, and here's where I'm going to list some of my key observations. Now that we've spent some time analyzing these images, what are the key observations that I'm noticing? Or if this is a text source, if this is text, then write down a couple of key details, which would probably be quotes. A couple of key quotes from this text. In this case, with the visual, going back to the visual, I'm thinking about, we made some observations as a class about the relative size of people and what that tells us, perhaps about their social status. Here are a couple of my key observations based on the visual information. People are shown as bigger or smaller depending on their social rank. Wealthier or more powerful people are seated in the image. We see them in the top section here, while people who seem to be middle or lower class are shown hard at work. And I've also noticed that there aren't really any women visible in this image. We mainly see men or these figures down at the bottom. It's sort of hard to tell their gender. This is all information I'm going to analyze. So for the last part of your chart, the last column is for inference and analysis. Here you're going to think about, what does this source tell me about how gender, race, or class affected people's lives in ancient Kush, in this case in ancient Mesopotamia. So going back to my image one more time, I'm thinking now about my observations, and I'm inferring that women may have been expected to stay at home because women are not really shown on this image. They're not shown in public. They're not shown involved in this work, being part of the king's court or being out in the fields, being visible. So I've jotted down that inference. I'm also inferring that lower class people worked hard. Upper class people had more time, it looks like, for leisure. They're shown partying, sitting around, not really working. So this is my analysis right here. Okay, I'm going to quickly show you, I'm going to walk you through the same steps for a text. When you get to sources 3 and 4, you're going to choose one of those sources to analyze today. So for example, if I were analyzing the text of Hammurabi's code, this is a primary source. And here's some of the laws that we read through when we analyzed this text. So I'm skipping over this sourcing. But when I get to evidence, instead of jotting down my observations, I'm jotting down a couple of quotes that I want to analyze. And I've chosen these ones right here. If a man knock out the teeth of his equal, his teeth shall be knocked out. If he knock out the teeth of a freedman, he shall pay 1/3 of a gold mina. Okay, I'm going to analyze the differences between these laws. So I've chosen these two. I've quoted from the text. Here are my quotes. And when I get to the inference and analysis column, I'm going to jot down some inferences about, I'm thinking more specifically about class. What does this information tell me about how people were treated in ancient Mesopotamia depending on their class or depending on their social status, whether they had more power, whether they were considered citizens or freedmen who had been enslaved or someone who was still enslaved. So I'm going to continue jotting here. All right, so you're ready to go to your chart. You've got 2 visual sources to analyze. Then you're going to choose a text, choose source 3 or 4, and then choose 2 additional sources from the sources that are posted on Schoology. Skimming down here on the page. All right, go ahead and start.